Mr. Nzimande.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Minister.
Yeah, I must apologize. I've just been messed up. That's the price you pay for being a minister. I've read half of my speech at a UJ function.
You read our
I
speech
first
at the
joined
UJ
here.
function?
Yes, at an Erasmus Plus function at UJ, which I'm told I was invited to, but I apologize because I wanted to be part of this one. I have read half my speech to them.
Minister, we do not mind hearing that speech again.
I'm really very sorry about this. You know, I mean, I'll just have to call people to account in my office because it's just not acceptable. And also time is against me now, but okay, let me allow you then perhaps to.
Yeah, I will do a very
hand
brief.
over back to you.
No, thank you very much, Minister. I'll do a very brief introduction. Colleagues, we have Dr. Nzimande, who is the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Technology. Minister Nzimande was appointed as the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Technology in May 2019. And prior to that, he was the Minister of Transport from 2018 to 2019. And Honorable Nzimande was also the Minister of Higher Education and Training in 2014 to 2017. To keep it short, colleagues will know that he is a General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, the Chairperson of the Parliamentary Select Committee on Education, is the Deputy Chair of the Central Committee of South African Communist Party, and the Chairperson of the Financial Sector Campaign Coalition. Minister, we gotta save you time. We'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Program Director. Let me greet the Director of the Wits Center for Diversity Studies, Professor Melissa Steyn. Esteemed speakers invited to this conference.
I am here,
Academics
Minister.
and researchers who are present. Distinguished delegates, student participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start by thanking the Wits Center for Diversity Studies under the leadership of Professor Steyn for organizing this conference. This is a very important conference focusing broadly on the role that the humanities and social sciences can play in advancing human and social development in contemporary society. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. The theme of this conference focuses specifically on the politics and practices of ignorance. In other words, how ignorance is often mobilized by a powerful interest in society to entrench marginalization of the weak and therefore maintain the status quo of unequal power relations. Our history in South Africa is under apartheid had largely been about this. This is the reality of the world we live in today, exemplified by the growing phenomenon of fake news, which is aimed at misleading millions of people across the world by deliberately feeding them with untruths or half-truths. The aim of this fake news is to sow confusion by blurring the line between what is factual and what is not. The truth in this scenario becomes what people are bombarded with on a regular basis by powerful media houses and groups in society, who by virtue of control of resources are able to sustain the publicity of their stories. This world of half-truths, in my view, has an ideological basis. It is enabled by the current neoliberal global order, which privileges the dominance of a singular idea. That is the imposition and superiority claims of usually liberal economics sponsored by powerful nations, institutions, and interest groups globally. Any idea that seems to go contrary to this thinking is frowned upon and confronted with hostility and misrepresentation in the global media. That's not the kind of societies we would like to build. The irony is the neoliberal offensive against difference and plurality of ideas and practices happens in the 21st century, a period in which is characterized by multiculturalism and fluidity of physical and cultural borders. Within the post-school education and training domain in which we are operating, the neoliberal agenda is exemplified by the increasing pressure on universities and colleges across the world to be run like businesses. No one says, though, there is nothing we can learn from running businesses about running our institutions. But this then becomes the problem. This then becomes this idea of an entrepreneurial university, which essentially pushes the universities to be profit-driven and treats students as customers instead of being citizens. In this context, universities are seen as merely providing services to students in the form of academic programs using the principle of demand and supply. This means that programs that are in high demand in the market are the ones that are given priority insofar as institutional offering and funding support is concerned. The conceptualization of education as a social good, which is, by the way, the foundation and philosophy of UNESCO, is given a backseat within this framing of higher education. Some scholars have characterized the dominance of neoliberal thinking in higher education as a clear example of market capture and have presented it as a real threat to institutional autonomy and academic freedom. People often see authoritarian regimes as a threat to academic freedom and institutional autonomy. Yes, they are, that's true. But also this framework that is intolerant of other ideas is no less a threat, even if it is couched in liberal language, is no less a threat to institutional autonomy and academic freedom. This is because often universities are beholden to donors in terms of the programs they should offer, and academics are increasingly put under pressure to demonstrate the relevant and market value of their research. This is, in fact, the plight of the African continent. That the research priorities in our continent largely and agendas are set by donors because of dependence on the continent on donor monies. We are not saying that there is no space for donor money. I mustn't be misunderstood. But it's at all times important that we engage the impact of that and the consequences of that, intended and unintended. The neoliberal framework in higher education worldwide prioritizes the STEM subjects, that is, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The idea is that these subjects have immediate value in the global knowledge economy. That is, they produce skills necessary for economic development and growth. Furthermore, they are regarded as producing global workforce since the skills they produce are applicable globally and are not bound by national borders. This is in contrast to the humanities and social sciences, which are seen as more local in their application and often taken as having less value in industry. Although the value of the STEM subjects cannot be denied, STEM subjects are very important. But the techno-economic orientation of the current knowledge economy tend to result in the devaluation of humanities and social sciences. And this is deeply problematic. It's very short-sighted and it fails to comprehend the totality and complementary nature of educational disciplines. We've just come out of the COVID-19 period. There was no period that actually emphasized the importance of multidisciplinarity and the fact that COVID-19 was not just a biomedical challenge, but it was also a social change because it affected living human beings. So humanity then is confronted by many different challenges that cannot fully address without fully understanding and appreciation of the role and place of culture and values. Culture and values are important aspects of the scientific choices and research projects we pursue. They inform our research approaches and the research questions we pose. There is no scientific endeavor that takes place outside human relations and cultural orientations. Before you can introduce or administer a health product, for instance, to people, you first have to interface with their languages, cultures, and value systems. Without this human connection, no development program, no matter how well intended, can be expected to succeed. By emphasizing the human element, the humanities and social sciences are valuable, facilitating cross-cultural understanding and respect. They enable tolerance for diversity and difference, which are defining features of contemporary societies. We ourselves in South Africa would define ourselves as a South African nation, but premised on its diverse cultures. Respect and understanding of others create conditions for peaceful coexistence between nations and communities, and are also important ingredients for democratic citizenship. An American philosopher and social theorist, Martha Nussbaum, in her seminal book titled Not for Profit, which was published in 2010, presents a strong critique of what she described as education for profit model. Like many other progressive scholars, she sees education as fundamentally a social good and argues that while economic growth imperatives are important, no one can deny this, the primary purpose of education should be to develop critical thinking skills, critical for meaningful engagement and contribution to democratic values in society, over and above whatever technical skills that are also taught. In a country such as South Africa, where our post-school education and training institutions are still battling the legacy of apartheid and colonialism, we see the humanities and social sciences as having a critical role to play in the transformation process. These disciplines provide useful critical thinking skills to assist us address the horrendous challenges of our past and imagine the future we want. They are critical in the promotion of inclusive institutional cultures, celebration of diversity, as well as offering rich ideas of how a democratic society should look like. This is the potential that humanities, social sciences, and creative arts carry, and we constantly urge and challenge our scholars in these fields to help us think through these difficult issues. While we acknowledge that education carries higher societal value than the instrumentalist view posits, we also urge our scholars in the arts and social sciences to also begin to think critically about the character and nature of these disciplines in the times we live in. We are deeply embroiled in a technology age. Artificial intelligence, for instance, is taking over, and there seems to be no way outside it. Without necessarily subjecting the human to the machine, we need to seriously engage with these developments and see how we can use them for the betterment of our human experience. We need to think of things such as digitalization of our African languages, for instance, in order to make them more visible in the public domain. This is the only way to capture the attention of the young people who spend huge amount of their time in the social media space. government support for the humanities and social sciences remained very strong in South Africa. This is not only confined to support for programs offerings within or with university faculties. Over the past 10 years or so, I'm proud that I led and initiated the establishment of a dedicated institute to support research in humanities and social sciences. In fact, between 2013 and now, we've produced more than 500 doctoral graduates through this program. In many ways, I dread sometimes to think what would have happened to the humanities in South Africa now had this intervention not been made. The institution that we established, which is the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, has a special mandate to advance and coordinate scholarship in the humanities and social sciences. The Institute works with and through the universities to support the humanities and social sciences in South Africa and the African continent more broadly. It does this through a variety of programs, such as doctoral schools, catalytic projects, in other words, projects that are opening up deliberately new areas of research that have not been adequately taken up. One such catalytic project, as a matter of example, is Southern Africa pre-1652, an area that has hardly been really explored, and it's something that is very important to understand who we are and where we come from. So the aim of these projects, there's also the African Pathways Program, and these programs are aimed to contribute towards the sustainability of scholarship and research in these disciplines in South Africa and the African continent, I dare say. By institutionalizing support for the humanities and social sciences, we recognize the important role that these disciplines continue to play in shaping and entrenching democratic values in a post-apartheid South Africa. I would also like to challenge yourselves to say one of the critical responsibilities of social sciences and humanities is to foster multidisciplinarity, a scholarship of multidisciplinarity. The interface, for instance, between, like COVID showed us, biomedical sciences, chemistry, natural sciences, together with human sciences and social sciences. Human beings are not just biological beings. They are also social beings, and we live in societies. Because of the particular understanding of this within the social sciences, it's important that also social sciences do not only exist as separate disciplines, but also that they are infused into other disciplines. For instance, the issue of language is very critical in carrying forward and communicating in whatever we are doing, whether we are designing bridges as engineers and so on. There's a challenge that I would really like to put to you as social scientists and humanities scholars. We acknowledge important conversations that continue to take place in these disciplines in our universities around issues of curriculum reform, decoloniality, and broader transformation, amongst others. These conversations can only enrich our policymaking processes by also critically presenting options for further improvement and reimagining of our post-school education and training landscape into the future. My own outlook as a minister is that we do need critical feedback as government. Not feedback that is only telling us the good things we're doing, but feedback also that will tell us about shortcomings and where we can actually be able to improve. Only if we are such a government that we can actually be able to play our role in a manner that develops our communities and our societies. In conclusion, I wish you very fruitful deliberations during the course of this conference. And once more, apologies about this misunderstanding that we had initially. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for this input that I think speaks into the problematics that we actually find ourselves banging our heads on all the time, which is, particularly the way in which we're imbricated within the neoliberal dynamics, capitalist dynamics of the world, and the ways in which this actually creates environments that are very difficult when one has, like, for example, as our center, where we are entirely soft funded, and we have to depend on donor money, which is really difficult. And the issues that you raised around multidisciplinarity, we like to call ourselves undisciplined or undisciplinary. But again, these are spaces that are difficult in the universities because universities tend to prioritize disciplines, and the areas of knowledge that have been demarcated as sort of like the divisions of the universe within the university as what matters, but these were demarcated in the mid 1800s in Europe. And we find ourselves struggling against this because, for example, we absolutely believe that the challenges of being different together are challenges that are entirely, typically of our time, and that this is the kind of area that we need to be examining and we need to be investing in, and we need to be creating knowledge, doing research that feeds back into the need for such knowledge. Minister, and I also want to say, you spoke to my heart when you said that, we're always, as human sciences, social sciences, humanities, we're always being pitted against the STEM subjects, and we're being told that we are the soft sciences and they are the hard sciences. And I always say to my students, don't be fooled. It's one thing to sort of examine a hoho under a microscope. It doesn't talk back to you. But try and transform a society. Now that's hard science. I mean, that's really hard. I know there have been discussions around things like doctoral studies and postdoctoral studies that have been burning at our conference, but I'll hand over to our first questioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Comrade Minister. My name is Siposami Malunga. I have the really distinct, pride of saying that you are one of the few ministers that sort of like tends to speak his mind and doesn't give too much bullshit, which is a good thing, because my own work with politicians has always tended to be full of bullshit. I was actually quite impressed by the fact that you were one of the few ministers on the Zimbabwe question that was quite clear and unequivocal about your own understanding of the problem there. So you won my heart many years ago, from the time you were in the unions. So that for me is a comment. The question, Minister, is taking away. I know that you are in higher education, but the impact of ignorance and manipulation of information is more on the populace and much less, because universities tend to be enclaves. You started when you're talking about misinformation and fake news. And the question for me is what is the government strategy on addressing questions of fake news? Because the impact is massive on the population. Thank you.
Minister, I think let's take the questions one at a time, then you have more control to control the time that you have available.
Well, Prof, maybe it's better if I just take all of them, just the three at once, and then I'll come back one time.
Okay, that's fine. Any other questions? There's another one.
Thank you, Minister, for that wonderful presentation. I'm from the Center for Diversity Studies. My question is probably one that intersect with a different sort of ministry, but obviously these things don't occur in silos. So what regarding South African University as an international platform, or the attempt to create an international South African university, as a migrant myself, I think one of the challenges that is emerging is the clash between the immigration policy and the attempt to create a diverse international hub in those university spaces. And I think someone from Home Affairs could understand, respond to that better. But just to say, we responded to the interlinkages between the work that you are doing and other areas that sort of on academic freedom, and also the ability for the university to become an international hub for internationals do not necessarily have to feel the pain of existing as academics and thinkers in South Africa.
Well, Prof, I didn't quite hear because the microphone was not very clear at all on my side. I wonder if you can just summarize that question for me, just the nub of it. No, because I hear Prof better than I have heard there, because that microphone was very cracky.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that.
Great. So I was saying that, Doc, that an honorable minister, I was saying, as a migrant myself, who's an academic at WITS, some of the experiences of international scholars have been that of the migration policy not necessarily sort of really corresponding with the desire of a lot of South African universities to go international. So I know that your ministry serves a different role, but how have you dealt with the challenges of the interlinkage between your work and, say, the Department of Home Affairs in regard to making it sustainable for international thinkers, particularly Black thinkers, to not really feel the pain of existing legitimately in a South African university?
Okay, that's clearer now.
Okay, any last question? It'll be the last one. Okay, well then I'm going to ask it. Minister, one of the sessions that we've already had spoke to the problem of the way in which we're pushing doctoral studies and postdoctoral studies. And the question was, are we misleading young people into believing that there is a future in academia when the number of academic jobs does not go up concomitantly? And are we in fact lying to young people about their prospects in the South African university system? So, Minister, over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much for those questions. The first one, if I had the name correctly. You are right that the impact, actually maybe the more devastating impact of fake news is on society generally. Now, my own view is that we should actually use the opportunities that we have now to foster more openness and engagement and much more diverse, in line with your own identification, much more diverse sources of media. I think that never in the history of humanity, maybe, have we had such an opportunity to be able to communicate through social media platforms in particular, and also opportunities through that to have electronic publications and so on, because that was the only way we are actually going to be able to counter this. Even those who are least educated, in interacting with those who are more knowledgeable and informed, that actually may help us to actually address this. I mean, right now, we are just having two classical examples of huge disinformation and propaganda. The conflict in Ukraine, and now of late, the conflict in Palestine, in the Middle East. And I have never really seen such a need to be able to have diversity of views. Even in South Africa, the SABC, our public broadcaster, seems to be lost, not actually allowing enough expression of diversity of views. They aren't even clear themselves about their own editorial policy, for instance, when it comes to the Middle East. The issue of the oppression, continued oppression of the Palestinian people. Our own history as South Africa. Our Nelson Mandela said it. The South Africans shall never be fully free unless the Palestinians are free. But there is lots of information that is actually planting confusion than anything else. I would say that your role also, how do your ideas in academia filter out to wider society? That for me is another big issue. In my department, for instance, I'm fighting. Why are we still using only mainstream newspapers physically to report about the work we are doing in science? Why are we not having our own publication? Have subscribers electronically from all over the world who have a great interest in science that is taking place in South Africa, rather than relying on established print media to be able to do that. So one of the things also is to say to yourselves, how do we, what's the academic community interface? Our own universities, in terms of what we are trying to foster this relationship, is that we say our universities have got 4 primary roles. They are teaching institutions, they are learning institutions, they are research institutions, but also they must do community outreach, which is very important. In many instances, I just see, with due respect, many people who are not academic, who are political commentators. Just about everybody today who wants his or her voice on radio or newspapers, is a political commentator. Many of them aren't even experts in the fields in which they are talking about. And yourselves, as academics and researchers, your own work needs to find outlets. And I'm arguing that there is more space today to be able to do that through social media, in order to have much more informed and critical news as part of fighting fake news also in the process. The second question on migrants, as you call them, to South Africa, let me tell you our position as Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Innovation is that higher education requires multiplicity of ideas. And in countries, it's always healthy to have a dose of nationals who come from outside that country. We welcome that. In South Africa at the moment, by the way, we're amongst the top 5 countries in the world, proportionately in terms of having what one would call foreign academics or foreign nationals. And 70% of them come from the rest of the African continent. It's very important that we actually have that. The trouble, though, is when this issue then gets abused by those who oppose transformation, by saying, for instance, where there is a need to affirm Black scholars and only appoint people who come from outside South Africa, say Black scholars from the rest of the continent, and say, we are transforming. Yes, you are transforming, but that can't be used to begin to exclude South Africans, because that's the issue we are faced with. We need a balance. You do need foreign nationals, but at the same time, you do need to provide space for South Africans. For instance, the complaints I'm getting, usually from South Africans, they say, Minister, the history department at this particular University A, all the honors and master's students, there is no single South African students. They come from a particular country where the dean or the professor happens to come from. I think that's pushing it to the other extreme. That's what sometimes then causes these kinds of attitudes, which should not be tolerated. Xenophobic attitude. It's something that should not be tolerated, really. So we need to strike a balance. We do need foreign nationals, for want of a better term, to be part of our university system. It enriches our students to be taught by people who come from different environments, as well as ensuring that in the process, you don't disadvantage the space of South Africans who want to be in academia as well. I hope that I'm answering that question correctly. That's our attitude. Yes, Prof, this issue you're asking, you know, are we misleading our young people to say, do your PhDs and then so that you will be in academia and there are less spaces? Well, there's a new avenue of debate and research now that is opening up. Where do PhDs get employed? And where should PhDs be employed? The answers that are beginning to emerge is that actually, much as PhDs, we need them in academia, but PhDs shouldn't only be employed as academics. They can play a role in the public sector. I'm one of those doctorate ones who is a minister, who happens to be a minister, an MP, a public servant, you know. And there are many others, by the way. My two director generals, they are PhD graduates. In the public service, there is a lot of space for PhDs, I can tell you from my experience. And also in the private sector, those who want to join the private sector, we can't stop that. The problem is that maybe PhDs have been associated with only one career path, which is academia. Yes, we need them in academia, but that's not the only path for PhDs. PhDs are needed in broader society in much bigger numbers, to be quite honest. That maybe at the moment, we don't have a private sector or a public sector that's absorbing them in numbers. I remember at some stage, by the way, Sasol, the company, was the single largest employer of PhDs in South Africa, because they were doing research in terms of what Sasol was doing, you know, as a public entity and so on. So the place of PhDs is in society generally. Although, of course, we do have a challenge that at this moment, my biggest task that I have is to increase the numbers of PhDs who are academics. Because at the moment, I think we're at 47% of academics who have PhDs. 53% they don't. It will differ from one university to the other. WITS, I suppose, and UCT, they are possibly having more, way beyond 60%, maybe even 70% of academics with PhDs. But if you go to University of Zululand, you even find lecturers who have honors degrees. That we need to change, you know, as something that is important. But don't discourage your students to do PhDs, please. We will need them. If there are still constraints at the moment, they are needed for the future of our country. Thank you very much. By the way, I should say, Prof, sorry,
Yes.
there is a study, there are a few studies that have emerged now in South Africa. We ourselves released a study as the Department of Science and Innovation on where are PhDs employed in South Africa. So we need to look at that and also engage that, because it will give you some insights as to where PhDs are at this point in time. Sorry, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Minister, I think on behalf of all of us, I can truly say that we have felt very, very honored that you have given your time this afternoon to spend with us, to debate and engage with us on these issues. And we really appreciate it. Thank you very much. We're going to continue with our discussions, and you're welcome to stay, of course, Minister, for as long as you would like to. But just to say that you know, we appreciated it, and however long you stay, that is indeed your choice. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. Unfortunately, I had to leave because I've got to beat this Cape Town traffic to the airport.
No,
So
we
I'm sorry
understand.
about that.
And
I would have
we are-
really loved to stay and just listen, you know.
yes, well, of course, we would love that too, but we just appreciate that you really did give us this time. It was more than we could have hoped for. Thank you.
Thank you very much and all the best for your conference.